it is wild when you actually say it out loud.
Yeah.
Like, we tend to think of modern geopolitics as being entirely about, I don't know, semiconductor supply chains or naval bases.
Right, exactly.
But in this specific corner of the world, it feels like the ultimate strategic weapon is literally the concept of reincarnation.
It is. I mean, right now, the Chinese Communist Party is planning to use this ornate historical artifact like a golden urn from the Qing dynasty.
Wow.
Yeah, they're going to use it to randomly draw lots to select the reincarnation of a religious leader. They are literally attempting to legislate the metaphysical journey of a human soul just to secure a geopolitical border.
It's honestly like something out of a novel. But it's about to create a massive diplomatic shockwave for India.
Oh, absolutely. A huge one.
Well, welcome, everyone. You are tuning in to the Daily Deep Dive, the 3D initiative of UPSC with Saurabh Kaushik. I'm so glad you're here with us today.
Yeah.
Our mission with this deep dive is custom tailored for you. We know you are staring down a mountain of daily information, so we're here to help you cut through the noise, connect the dots, and extract the absolute most vital insights from today's sources for your preparation.
Yeah, we aren't just going to read facts at you. We really want to figure out what those facts actually mean. We're exploring the mechanisms behind the news, the how and the why, and understanding how these seemingly isolated events interact to form the bigger picture of your syllabus.
So to give you a roadmap of where we're heading, I'm going to spend just a minute here rapidly previewing the scope of our source material. We have an 18-point index on the table today.
It's a big one.
It really is. Ready? Here we go. 1. India's push for a UNSC non-permanent seat. 2. The Census 2026 open column for caste. 3. The commissioning of INS Mahendragiri.
Right.
4. PM Modi's Indonesia tour. 5. The Quad's future under a potential second Trump term. 6. El Niño's dent in wind and hydropower. 7. Indira Point's development. 8. The Dalai Lama's 91st birthday. 9. Vikram 1's commercial space launch. 10. A delay in the ethanol 25% blend. 11. A Taj Mahal survey plea in the Allahabad High Court.
Lots of legal stuff today, too.
Oh, yeah. 12. Voting is more than a statutory right. 13. Bar associations refusing to take up certain cases. 14. Article 370 and Sam Prasad Mukherjee.
Important historical context there.
Definitely. 15. The Pune-Mumbai missing link landslide. 16. The Delhi High Court ruling on media as a public function. 17. Urban flooding and rainwater absorption. And finally, 18, NATO defense spending and cash transfers.
Like you said, it is a massive stack of notes. But to ensure we provide the conceptual clarity you actually need, we're going to systematically unpack the most heavily detailed topics from this list.
Right.
We'll dive deep into the first dozen or so, mapping out the architecture behind the headlines.
And as you heard right at the top of the show, we are starting with a major geopolitical flashpoint that perfectly intertwines religion, high-stakes diplomacy, and a 91st birthday.
Yeah, it really does.
According to the PIB highlights in our notes, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama turns 91 today, July 6th, 2026. And as is the annual practice, Prime Minister Modi has extended his birthday greetings. Now, I have to ask, wishing a 91-year-old spiritual leader a happy birthday seems like the most standard, benign, diplomatic courtesy imaginable. Why is this practically radioactive?
So to understand why a simple birthday tweet sends tremors through Beijing, you have to look at the historical context of how the Dalai Lama came to be in India in the first place.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Well, this isn't just a spiritual leader, right? Historically, he was the temporal ruler of Tibet. He was enthroned back in 1950.
Right.
But later that same decade, following a brutal Chinese military crackdown on a Tibetan uprising in 1959, he had to flee for his life.
And he crossed the border into India.
Exactly. He crossed into India, and he has lived in exile in Dharamsala up in Himachal Pradesh ever since. And crucially, India doesn't just host him as a monk. We host the Central Tibetan Administration, or the CTA.
The CTA. So that is essentially a government in exile, right?
Yep.
Like they have their own parliament and elections operating on Indian soil.
Yes, exactly.
How does that possibly square with India's official diplomatic stance? Because from what I understand about our foreign policy, we officially recognize Tibet as an integral part of China.
We do, and that is the incredibly delicate tightrope walk of India's One China policy.
Right.
India officially recognizes that the Tibet Autonomous Region is a part of the territory of the People's Republic of China. We don't legally recognize Tibet as an independent state.
But we still let the CTA operate.
Exactly. Simultaneously, we allow the Dalai Lama and the CTA to operate freely, hold elections, and advocate for Tibetan cultural preservation from Dharamsala.
Wow, that's a tough balancing act.
It really is. So when PM Modi issues birthday greetings, the Ministry of External Affairs, the MEA, has to frame them very, very carefully.
How so?
They explicitly state that the Dalai Lama is a, quote, revered spiritual figure in India, and that the greetings are merely a private, personal expression of respect. They try to completely strip any political endorsement from it.
But I'm assuming China doesn't buy the whole private expression of respect argument.
Never. I mean, every single time this happens, the Chinese Foreign Ministry issues a vehement opposition.
Right, they get furious.
Yeah. Their official line is that they firmly oppose any form of contact by official Indian government personnel with what they derisively call the Dalai clique. They view any interaction, even just a birthday wish, as an act that legitimizes a separatist political movement.
Okay, so that explains the current tension. But going back to what you said at the very beginning of the show, this idea of weaponizing reincarnation, our notes highlight that the real storm is brewing on the horizon because of his age.
Exactly. The Dalai Lama is 91.
So the succession question is no longer some distant theoretical debate. It's an imminent crisis. How does the succession actually work, and why does it involve India so heavily?
This is where it gets absolutely fascinating for anyone mapping out international relations paradigms. The Dalai Lama has publicly indicated that he might not reincarnate in Tibet at all.
Wait, he said that publicly?
Yes. His reasoning is simple, right? The purpose of reincarnation is to continue his work. And he feels he just cannot do that under the controlled, oppressive circumstances of Chinese-occupied Tibet.
That makes sense.
So he strongly suggested that his successor might be born in a free country. And geographically and demographically, that very likely means India.
Like where?
Perhaps in the Tawang region of Arunachal Pradesh or up in Ladakh.
But China is not going to just sit back and accept a successor who is discovered and chosen in India, right? They clearly want control over the institution.
Oh, absolutely. The Chinese Communist Party, which, keep in mind, is an officially atheist organization, insists that it alone has the legal and historical right to select the next Dalai Lama.
This is just so ironic.
It really is. And their mechanism for doing this is that historical practice called the Golden Urn system.
Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. This was a system introduced by the Qing dynasty back in the late 18th century to exert imperial control over Tibetan and Mongolian lamas. Basically, the names of potential candidates are placed in a golden urn, and a name is drawn.
Like a lottery.
Kind of, yeah. And China actually passed a law in 2007 essentially stating that all reincarnations of living Buddhas must get government approval.
Wow. So we are looking at a very real scenario in the near future where there are just two Dalai Lamas.
Exactly.
Like one chosen by the Chinese Communist Party via the Golden Urn in Tibet, who acts as this state-sanctioned figurehead, and one recognized by the current Dalai Lama's administration, potentially born in India.
That is exactly the scenario intelligence agencies are preparing for. It's going to force every single country in the world to choose which Dalai Lama they recognize.
Oh, man.
And for India, it will be the ultimate test. Do we recognize an Indian-born Dalai Lama and risk a massive rupture in relations with China? Or do we capitulate? It transforms the fundamental concept of religious freedom into this massive geopolitical wedge issue.
That is incredibly tense. And it perfectly illustrates how managing our relationship with China isn't just about managing troop deployments in border states. It's about checking their influence at every possible level of global governance.
Precisely.
Which transitions us perfectly to the second major topic in our notes. India's massive diplomatic push for a United Nations Security Council non-permanent seat for the 2028-29 term.
Yes. The MEA is actively preparing India's 9th bid for a non-permanent seat.
9 bids, wow.
Yeah. For those structuring their international organizations notes, it's really helpful to quickly map the architecture of the UNSC.
Go for it.
It has 15 members in total. 5 of those are permanent. The P5, that's the US, UK, France, Russia, and China.
Right, the big 5.
And they hold the ultimate trump card, the veto power. The other 10 are non-permanent members. They are elected by the UN General Assembly for 2-year terms, distributed by geographic region.
And India is in the Asia-Pacific group, right?
Correct. India competes in the Asia-Pacific group, which is allocated 2 of those non-permanent seats in any given cycle.
Okay, I have to stop you there and ask the really obvious question.
Sure.
India's explicitly stated, loudly declared foreign policy priority is getting a permanent seat on the UNSC. We want to be part of the P5. Well, we want it to be a P6 or a P7.
Right.
So why are we pouring so much diplomatic capital, time, and energy into campaigning for a non-permanent temporary seat? Doesn't that just kind of legitimize the status quo that we are actively trying to dismantle?
I mean, it's a very fair critique. Why settle for the waiting room when you were demanding the corner office?
Exactly.
But the diplomatic reality is that a non-permanent seat is a highly strategic stepping stone. The reform process for permanent membership is painfully, agonizingly slow. We are talking about decades of gridlock.
Right.
So by continually securing non-permanent terms like we did in 2011-12 and most recently in 2021-22, India maintains a highly visible, authoritative presence in the room.
I see. So it's about being at the table.
Exactly. When you are on the council, even temporarily, you get to chair critical committees. You get to draft resolutions on maritime security, counterterrorism, peacekeeping. It allows India to prove unequivocally that it belongs at the high table while we just wait for the table to be rebuilt.
And building that table involves some serious, entrenched factional warfare. Our sources detail the competing factions, and honestly, it reads like a political thriller.
Okay.
Let's break these down. On one side, demanding permanent seats, you have the G4.
Right. The G4 is essentially this mutual support pact consisting of India, Germany, Japan, and Brazil.
Okay.
They are presenting a united front based on their sheer weight in the modern world. They argue, accurately, that the UN was built in 1945. The world has changed.
Radically changed.
Yeah. The G4 represents the third, fourth, and fifth largest economies globally. India is the world's most populous nation and largest democracy. So they are proposing expanding the UNSC to about 25 or 26 members, adding 6 new permanent seats without veto power initially, just to reflect modern geopolitical realities.
But standing in their way is a group with arguably the best name in international diplomacy. The Coffee Club.
Officially known as Uniting for Consensus.
Right. And this group is led by Italy, Pakistan, Mexico, and South Korea. And looking at the notes, their primary motivation isn't some grand philosophical vision of UN efficiency. It's pure, unadulterated regional rivalry, isn't it?
Oh, it is defensive diplomacy at its absolute finest. The Coffee Club explicitly and fiercely opposes the creation of any new permanent seats.
Because they don't want their neighbors getting a promotion.
Exactly. They want to block their immediate regional rivals from gaining elevated status over them. Pakistan's primary foreign policy objective at the UN is to ensure India does not get a permanent seat.
Right.
Italy is terrified of Germany getting one. South Korea is determined to block Japan. Mexico and Argentina want to block Brazil.
It's so petty, but so effective.
It is. It's a coalition built entirely on the premise of preventing someone else's promotion. They argue that adding more permanent members just creates more inequality.
So we have the G4 demanding entry and the Coffee Club holding the door shut. But what does this all mean for actual, tangible reform? Let's look at the legal mechanics of how the UN actually changes its own rules. I believe it falls under Article 108 of the UN Charter.
Exactly. Article 108 is basically the fortress wall. It states that any amendment to the UN Charter requires 2 things. First, 2/3 of the members of the UN General Assembly must vote yes.
Okay, that's hard, but doable.
But the second requirement is the killer. The amendment must be ratified by all 5 permanent members of the Security Council. All 5.
Wow. That means any single P5 country can veto the entire reform process.
Yes.
So aren't we essentially just waiting around for China to voluntarily give up its exclusive club membership in Asia and invite India in? Because given what we just discussed about Tibet and the border, that seems statistically impossible.
Yeah, that is the famous P5 veto problem. China has consistently used ambiguous diplomatic language to block the G4's aspirations, specifically targeting Japan and India. But here's the new variable that analysts believe might finally force the door open. The Africa Group.
Oh, interesting. The notes mention the Eswatini Consensus. What exactly is that?
The Eswatini Consensus is the unified position of the African Union. They are demanding at least 2 permanent seats with veto power and 5 non-permanent seats for Africa.
Okay.
And this demand is gaining massive moral and political momentum globally. Think about it. You have an entire continent of 1.4 billion people with 54 member states, and they have 0 permanent representation on the body that dictates global security.
Yeah, that's completely indefensible.
It is. And the strategic calculation is this. If the international community finally caves and agrees that Africa must get permanent seats, the dam breaks.
Because you can't open the door for one and not the other.
Exactly. The logical justification for keeping India, Germany, Japan, and Brazil out is completely shattered. Africa might be the catalyst that forces the P5's hand to open the entire process.
And when India is in the room making its case, whether at the G20, the BRICS Summit, or the UN General Assembly, what is the primary moral and practical justification we use? Because we obviously talk about our economic size, but there's a specific metric India leans on heavily.
Yes, beyond our demographic weight, it is our peacekeeping record. This is a vital data point.
Right.
India is the largest cumulative troop contributor to UN peacekeeping operations in history. We have deployed over 200,000 military and police personnel across 49 different UN missions since the 1950s.
That's a massive commitment.
It is. And we have lost more peacekeepers in the line of duty than almost any other nation. We are essentially standing before the global community and saying, we bleed to uphold the UN's mandate in the most dangerous corners of the world. We deserve a permanent voice in shaping what that mandate actually is.
It shifts the argument from one of just entitlement to one of earned merit. It is a profoundly powerful argument. So while India is fighting tooth and nail for representation on the global stage back home, the very definition of domestic representation is about to face a seismic shift. Let's pivot our focus inward to the third major theme in our sources, Census 2026 and the highly debated caste column.
Right. This is a complex governance topic that strikes at the very heart of Indian society. But before we get into the mechanics of the census data, I think we really need to set some explicit ground rules for this discussion, given the nature of the topic.
Absolutely. To you, our listeners, we are entering a topic that is deeply, intensely politically charged.
Very much so.
There are very strong, legitimate perspectives on all sides of the caste census debate. Some view it as the ultimate necessary tool for social justice and equitable and resource distribution. Others view it as a dangerous tool that will further fragment and polarize society along caste lines. Our goal here today is strictly impartial reporting. We are solely analyzing the constitutional, demographic, and logistical facts presented in the sources. We are not endorsing any political stance or party platform. We are just looking at what this data collection practically means for governance.
Perfectly stated. So, what is the actual news development? The government is currently conducting the second phase rehearsal of India's Census 2026, which, as we know, was heavily delayed from its original 2021 schedule.
Right.
And the questionnaire being used in this rehearsal reportedly contains an open column for caste.
Let's define what an open column actually means, because it's fundamentally different from how we usually count marginalized groups in India, isn't it?
It is a massive departure. Currently, in our regular decadal census, we do enumerate scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, SCs and STs.
Okay.
But we do that using a predetermined, constitutionally notified list. The census enumerator essentially asks, are you a member of a community on this specific, legally defined list? It's a closed loop.
So there's basically a drop-down menu.
Exactly. But an open column for other castes means there is no drop-down menu. There is no predetermined list of acceptable answers. The head of the household self-reports whatever they consider their caste or subcaste to be, and the enumerator just writes it down exactly as spoken.
Which sounds simple in theory, but logistically it sounds like an absolute nightmare.
Oh, it is.
I'm trying to picture this. It's like trying to organize a massive national library. But instead of using predefined genres like fiction, biography, or history, you just hand a blank label to every single person who walks in the door and tell them to invent their own genre category for the book they're returning.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
You'd end up with millions of books categorized under thousands of slightly different, overlapping, highly personalized names. It would be a bureaucratic disaster to sort through.
That is the perfect analogy. You've just described the exact logistical nightmare that haunts this entire debate. And we know it's a nightmare because it has happened before. The ghost haunting this conversation is the 1931 British census. That was the last time a full, comprehensive caste census was successfully tabulated and published in India, overseen by British administrators who were just obsessed with categorizing Indian society.
And we haven't done one since.
Well, fast forward to 2011, the Indian government attempted something similar. They conducted a socioeconomic and caste census, the SECC, which was separate from the regular population census. And they collected the caste data using exactly this open-ended method.
And what was the result? Like, how many categories did they end up with?
They recorded an astonishing 4.6 million different caste names, subcastes, surnames, and clan titles.
4.6 million.
Yes. And even after massive efforts to clean the data and group synonyms, they were still left with something like 4,000 to 6,000 distinct caste categories.
Over 4,000 categories. How do you even begin to formulate national policy with that many variables?
You can't, because the exact same caste might be known by a dozen different names, spelling variations, or regional honorifics across different districts and languages.
That sounds impossible to parse.
It was. The data was so unstandardized, so overwhelmingly messy, and deemed so politically explosive that the caste enumeration portion of the 2011 SECC was never officially published.
Wait, they just hid it?
Yeah, the government only released the general socioeconomic welfare data. The caste data was essentially locked in a vault.
Okay, so if the data is historically that hard to clean, and we failed to process it in 2011, why is there such a massive, overwhelming political and social push to do an open column census now in 2026? What is the driving force here?
The driving force is the legal architecture of reservations, specifically tying back to the Supreme Court, the Mandel Commission, and the famous 50% reservation cap.
Right, the 50% rule.
Under Articles 15 and 16 of the Constitution, specifically Article 16.4, as interpreted in the landmark 1992 Indrasani judgment, the state provides reservations in education and public employment for other backward classes, or OBCs.
Go ahead.
But in that judgment, the Supreme Court placed a ceiling, stating that total reservations cannot exceed 50% of the available seats.
Right, the 50% ceiling is basically the bedrock of current affirmative action policy.
Exactly. But here is the critical vulnerability in that bedrock. That 50% architecture relies on an estimate that OBCs make up roughly 52% of the national population.
Okay.
Therefore, capping their reservation at 27%, which, combined with SC/ST reservations, hits the 50% total mark, was deemed legally sound. But where did that 52% estimate come from?
Don't tell me it was a 1931 census.
It was. The Mandel Commission didn't have modern data. They extrapolated that number based on the demographic data from that 1931 British census.
Wait, so the entire modern reservation framework, the distribution of millions of jobs and educational opportunities today, is resting on a demographic baseline that is nearly a century old.
Precisely. And this is where the raw politics and the new demographics collide violently, because we are starting to get new data.
Like what?
In late 2023, the state of Bihar conducted its own comprehensive state-level caste survey. And what did they find? They found that OBCs and extremely backward classes, or EBCs, together did not make up 52% of Bihar's population. They made up over 63%.
Oh, wow. So if this Census 2026 rehearsal scales nationally and the open column data is actually successfully processed this time, and it shows that the national OBC population isn't 52%, but is closer to 60 or 65%, what happens to the legal architecture?
The 1931 baseline shatters completely, and it builds a massive, undeniable statistical and political case to break the Supreme Court's 50% reservation cap.
Because the numbers just wouldn't justify the cap anymore.
Right, because if empirical data proves a marginalized community constitutes 65% of the population, legally limiting their representation to 27% becomes politically untenable for any government in power. It would force a constitutional reckoning.
And our notes mention that there's a secondary explosion waiting to happen alongside this regarding delimitation. Can you explain the OBC delimitation paradox?
This is where it gets incredibly complex. Remember, the data collected in Census 2026 is what will legally be used to redraw parliamentary constituencies, the delimitation exercise.
Right, allocating seats based on population.
We already know there is immense anxiety in southern states. They fear losing Lok Sabha seats to northern states because the north has had much higher population growth over the last 50 years.
Yeah, that's been a known issue for a while.
Now, layer the caste data on top of that. Northern states like UP and Bihar not only have faster growing populations overall, they likely have much higher concentrations of OBC populations compared to the national average.
Oh, I see where this is going.
So these demographic shifts could swing both reservation caps and political representation in the Lok Sabha heavily toward northern states and backward communities simultaneously. It would be a seismic political and social realignment of the Indian state.
For those taking notes on governance frameworks, this is the ultimate interlinked subject. You really cannot view it in isolation. You have to connect the fundamental rights in Articles 15 and 16, the legal precedent of the Indrasani judgment, the historical context of the Mandel Commission, and the future constitutional mechanics of the delimitation exercise.
Absolutely.
It's not just about counting people on a piece of paper. It's about fundamentally rewriting the arithmetic of political and social power in India.
Perfectly summarized. And from the profound complexities of our domestic demographics, let's shift our focus to the hard steel of national defense and maritime security. Let's look at the commissioning of INS Mahendragiri.
Right. This is scheduled for July 11th, 2026, at the Eastern Naval Command in Visakhapatnam. According to the notes, INS Mahendragiri is the sixth and final P-17A stealth frigate.
Yes.
It was built by Mazagon Dock Shipbuilders Limited in Mumbai, designed entirely in-house by the Navy's Warship Design Bureau, and it boasts over 75% indigenous content.
It is a major milestone for our defense capabilities. And it's a massive validation of the Atman Barda, or self-reliance initiative in defense manufacturing.
Right.
To truly understand the capability leap of the P-17A class, which is also known as the Nilgiri class, you have to look at what it's upgrading from. Its predecessor was the P-17 Shivalik class frigate. The P-17A takes that baseline and fundamentally overhauls the lethality and survivability of the ship.
Help me understand those upgrades mechanically. Because when I look at photos of a P-17 Shivalik and a new P-17A Mahendragiri, to an untrained civilian eye, they both just look like massive, standard gray warships.
Sure.
What specific engineering changes make the P-17A a leap forward? The notes mention stealth and weaponry. Let's start with stealth. How exactly does a 5,000-ton metal ship hide on an ocean?
It's all about signature management. A stealth ship doesn't become invisible, obviously. It just looks much smaller, or like something else entirely on an enemy's sensors.
Okay, how do they do that?
The P-17A achieves this through structural geometry. If you look closely at the hull and the superstructure, there are very few right angles.
Interesting.
The surfaces are angled and faceted to deflect incoming radar waves away from the receiver, drastically reducing its radar cross-section. Additionally, they use specialized radar-absorbent materials in the paint and coating.
So it's not just the shape, it's the paint, too.
Exactly. They also heavily suppress the ship's acoustic signature, the noise the engines and propellers make underwater to hide from enemy submarines, and they manage the exhaust systems to reduce their infrared or heat signature. It's really a multi-domain cloaking effort.
That is fascinating. And what about the weaponry? The notes highlight a massive upgrade in the missile systems.
This is the real game changer. The older P-17 Shivalik class had an 8-cell vertical launch system, or VLS, for its surface-to-air missiles.
Okay.
The new P-17A has a 32-cell VLS, specifically carrying the Barda medium-range surface-to-air missiles.
I want to pause on the VLS because I think a lot of people hear vertical launch system and don't realize why it's superior. With older ships, you had these mechanical arm launchers, right? The arm had to physically load a missile, turn, point at the incoming threat, and then fire.
Exactly. And that mechanical movement costs precious seconds. A vertical launch system stores the missiles in individual cells, pointing straight up into the sky.
So no moving parts, essentially.
Right. When a threat is detected, the missile is fired instantly, straight up, and then it uses its own thrust vectoring to turn mid-air toward the target. It removes the mechanical bottleneck.
Wow.
Going from an 8-cell VLS to a 32-cell VLS means the INS Mahendragiri can fire off dozens of missiles in rapid succession. It means the ship can survive a massive, coordinated swarm attack of incoming enemy cruise missiles or drones without needing to pause and reload.
That's a huge upgrade in survivability.
Add to that the 8 BrahMos supersonic cruise missiles it carries for anti-ship and land attack roles, and you have a heavily armed, highly survivable platform.
It is a phenomenal piece of engineering. And before we move on, I want to point out a detail from the notes that I just love the naming convention. Once you see the pattern for the Indian Navy, you never forget it.
Oh, the mountain ranges.
Exactly. These P-17A frigates are all named after mountain ranges in India. You have Nilgiri representing the Western Ghats, Udagiri, Himgiri for the Himalayas, Taragiri, Dunugiri, and now Mahendragiri, which honors a prominent peak in the Eastern Ghats in Odisha.
It is a great pattern to recognize for preliminary exams. And to complete that picture for the listener, Indian Navy submarines are typically named after predatory marine creatures or islands.
Like that.
For example, the Kalvari class is named after the deep-sea tiger shark. And our larger destroyers, like the Visakhapatnam class, are named after major frontline cities or historical warrior terms.
That's really cool. So we have these incredibly advanced stealth frigates rolling out of Indian dockyards capable of projecting power. But having a warship with a 5,000 nautical mile range is only strategically useful if you have partnerships across those oceans to leverage that reach. Which takes us straight from the docks of Visakhapatnam to Prime Minister Modi's latest Indo-Pacific tour. starting in Indonesia.
This is a textbook study in India's Act East policy and maritime diplomacy. PM Modi initiated a major three-nation tour starting in Jakarta, holding extensive bilateral talks with the new Indonesian president, Prabowo Subianto.
And reading through the outcomes, this wasn't just a trip for ceremonial diplomatic handshakes. The deliverables were very tangible.
Oh yeah, very concrete.
We are talking about initiating joint naval patrols, finalizing the sale of 6 HAL Advanced Light helicopters to the Indonesian Navy, and India's state-owned ONGC Videsh, securing participation in exploring a deep-water natural gas block off the Indonesian coast. Why is this specific bilateral relationship getting so much heavy focus right now?
To understand the focus, you have to look at a map of the region. Paint a geographic picture in your mind. Indonesia is not just a country. It is a massive, sprawling archipelago of over 17,000 islands.
Right.
And geographically, it sits directly astride the Malacca Strait.
The Malacca Strait, the ultimate strategic choke point of the global economy.
Exactly. Upward of 80% of all East Asian oil imports, which fuel the economies of China, Japan, and South Korea, must physically transit through the narrow waters of the Malacca Strait.
That's a staggering amount of energy.
It is. Indonesia controls the southern shore, Malaysia controls the north, and Singapore sits at the eastern exit. As tensions continue to rise exponentially in the South China Sea, with China aggressively asserting its territorial claims and building artificial military islands, naval cooperation with the country holding the keys to the primary entrance is absolutely vital.
It makes total sense.
By selling helicopters, conducting joint patrols, and building economic ties with Indonesia, India is actively securing its eastern maritime flank and ensuring freedom of navigation.
And what I find truly fascinating about this trip is how India is securing that flank, not just with military hardware and joint patrols, but through highly sophisticated avenues of soft power. The sources highlight 2 brilliant examples. First, digital diplomacy. We are officially integrating India's UPI system with Indonesia's QRIS system.
Yes, QRIS is Indonesia's national standard for instant QR code payments. Linking it directly with UPI means seamless, real-time cross-border transactions for tourists, businesses, and remittances.
That's huge for business.
It is the active internationalization of India's digital public infrastructure. We aren't just exporting goods, we are exporting the underlying digital architecture of modern commerce, similar to the linkages we've already established in Singapore, the UAE, and Thailand.
And the second soft power move is deeply rooted in cultural diplomacy. PM Modi visited the Prambanan Temple complex in Yogyakarta. For those who don't know, it's a stunning 9th century UNESCO World Heritage Site with massive shrines dedicated to the Hindu trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And the big announcement is that India is officially partnering with Indonesia, bringing in our archaeological survey of India experts to help conserve and restore it. It's this beautiful, tangible bridging of ancient civilizational architectural heritage with modern statecraft.
It is incredibly effective diplomacy. It reminds both populations of their shared historical roots. When you combine the hard power deterrence of naval patrols and helicopter sales with the modern economic soft power of UPI and the historical soft power of temple conservation, you forge a highly resilient, multi-dimensional, comprehensive strategic partnership.
One that is very hard for external adversaries to fracture.
Exactly.
But of course, bilateral relationships, no matter how strong, are just one layer of the puzzle. They all feed into the larger multilateral umbrella designed to secure this exact region. Let's look at the broader net. This brings us to the analysis of the Quad's future, specifically looking at what happens to this alliance if Donald Trump secures a second term in the White House from 2025 to 2029.
The quadrilateral security dialogue comprising India, the U.S., Japan, and Australia. Analyzing this is critical because the geopolitical climate and the leadership style in Washington heavily dictate the strategic weather in the entire Indo-Pacific.
Right.
And there is a fundamental philosophical difference in how different U.S. administrations view alliances like the Quad.
Let's break that history down.
Yeah.
Because the Quad isn't new. We had Quad 1.0 back in 2007, championed by Shinzo Abe, which kind of fizzled out because everyone was afraid of angering China.
Correct.
And now we have Quad 2.0, which has been elevated to regular leader summits.
Yeah.
How does the leadership view it now?
Right. Under the Biden administration, the Quad was framed and nurtured very much as a values-based alliance.
Okay.
It was explicitly pitched as four major maritime democracies binding together to provide public goods to the region, things like COVID vaccines, climate technology financing, and maritime domain awareness. It was framed as a positive democratic alternative to China's authoritarian debt-trap development model.
But Trump sees it differently.
Very much so. Donald Trump views international relations and alliances through a much more transactional, zero-sum lens. Historically, he does not prioritize the shared democratic values framing. He looks at alliances as leverage.
So how does that transactional approach specifically impact India's position within the Quad?
The primary concern outlined in the strategic analysis is that a Trump administration might use Quad membership and the overarching security benefits it provides India vis-a-vis China as leverage to extract hard economic concessions on bilateral trade.
Ah, I see.
Our notes mention a looming August 15 deadline for a bilateral trade agreement. The implicit transactional message from Washington would be, we are providing the naval security umbrella in the Indo-Pacific that keeps you safe. In return, you need to lower your tariffs and open your domestic markets much wider to American goods.
And India historically hates that kind of linkage. We fiercely protect our strategic autonomy. We have always resisted any push to turn the Quad into a binding, treaty-based military alliance.
Right.
We don't want a mutual defense pact where we are obligated to fight someone else's war.
Exactly. China loves to run propaganda, calling the Quad the NATO of the East or an Asian NATO. India spends a massive amount of diplomatic energy explicitly rejecting that label. We emphasize that it is a consultative partnership, not a military pact.
So if pushed too hard,
If a highly transactional U.S. administration pushes to formalize military commitments or uses security as a bargaining chip for trade, India will push back incredibly hard, potentially stalling the Quad's momentum entirely.
so let me ask the speculative worst-case scenario question. What happens if the U.S. pulls back? If a transactional approach causes too much friction, or if an America First policy leads the U.S. to just disengage from the Indo-Pacific to focus entirely on domestic issues or Europe,
Okay.
does the Quad lose its teeth and collapse? Or does it just force India, Japan, and Australia to finally stop relying on the American security umbrella and step up their own capabilities?
It is highly likely to be the latter. Analysts look at what is called the Quad-1 scenario.
Quad -1.
Yeah. If the U.S. were to drastically step back, the institutional foundation of the Quad in the Indo-Pacific would not collapse. Why? Because over the last decade, India, Japan, and Australia have actively built an incredibly robust trilateral foundation underneath the main Quad structure.
Like what kind of foundation?
They already conduct the complex Malabar naval exercises together. They have signed deep logistics exchange memorandums and maritime information sharing agreements. They are jointly working on resilient supply chains for critical minerals independent of China.
So they're already highly integrated.
Exactly. The habits of military and economic cooperation are already deeply entrenched between New Delhi, Tokyo, and Canberra. The U.S. obviously adds massive scale, intelligence, and deterrence power, but the trilateral core is entirely viable and functional on its own.
That is reassuring. So while we carefully monitor the shifting geopolitical climate of the Indo-Pacific, we must urgently address the literal climate impacting India right now.
Yes, we do.
That brings us to a critical intersection of geography and economy: El Niño's dent in India's energy grid.
This is a perfect case study for understanding how macro weather patterns directly threaten microeconomic stability.
Okay, lay it out.
The core issue is that Grid India, the agency responsible for keeping the lights on, is bracing for a 2026 monsoon season that is predicted to be severely degraded by El Niño conditions. And the impact of that degraded monsoon is a simultaneous double blow to our renewable energy generation.
I want you to explain the paradox here, because this is what often trips people up when looking at India's energy sector. India has been on an absolute tear building renewable capacity. It's constantly in the news.
Sure.
We have installed over 230 gigawatts of renewable power across the country, massive solar parks and wind farms. So if we have all this green capacity, why are we suddenly bracing for a grid crisis just because it doesn't rain?
Because renewable energy, by its very nature, is variable. It is entirely dependent on the weather cooperating.
Right.
Let's look at wind power first. A wet monsoon doesn't just mean less rain falling from the sky. It fundamentally means weak monsoonal winds sweeping across the subcontinent.
Oh, the wind drops too.
Exactly. India's wind energy capacity, which is over 80 gigawatts, is heavily concentrated in onshore wind farms in states like Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Rajasthan, and Andhra Pradesh. These massive turbines rely almost entirely on the strong, consistent winds generated by the southwest monsoon from June to September.
So if it's an El Nino year.
When an El Niño event warms the Pacific Ocean and weakens the monsoon circulation, those winds die down. Consequently, wind power output drops drastically, often by an estimated 20 to 25%, precisely during the peak generation season.
So the wind isn't blowing fast enough to turn the blades, and simultaneously, because it's an El Nino year and it's not raining, the rivers aren't flowing either.
Exactly. That is the dreaded double deficit. Reduced rainfall across the catchment areas means critically low reservoir inflows.
Yeah.
Massive legacy hydropower projects that we rely on for baseload power dams like Bakranangal in the north, Terry, and Koyna in Maharashtra are seeing their reservoir levels drop significantly below the 10-year average. Some river basins are facing a 35% water deficit. So simultaneously, your wind generation plummets and your hydro generation plummets.
And I imagine demand is going up at the same time.
Oh, massively. This happens right during severe heat wave conditions when agricultural demand for water pumps and urban demand for air conditioning is pushing total power demand to all-time record highs.
So how does Grid India actually keep the lights on? You can't just mandate the wind to blow or pass a law forcing it to rain. You have to make some painful economic and environmental choices to cover that massive shortfall.
Very painful choices, and they actively reverse our climate goals in the short term. To cover the immediate shortfall and prevent blackouts, Grid India has to aggressively ramp up thermal fossil fuel dispatch.
So back to coal.
Back to coal. They are pushing the plant load factor, which is the operational capacity of existing coal plants from a standard 65% up to 72% or even 80%. They are mining and burning more coal. Furthermore, they are being forced to import and burn liquefied natural gas, LNG, at incredibly high spot market prices, sometimes around $12 per MMBTU, just to maintain grid frequency and stability.
It's environmentally damaging and economically exhausting.
Exactly.
We are literally burning more coal and buying expensive foreign gas just because our massive renewable infrastructure is temporarily offline due to the weather.
Is there a greener structural solution in the pipeline so we aren't at the mercy of El Nino every few years?
Yes, and the government is aggressively accelerating its development. Pumped hydro storage.
Let me see if I understand pumped hydro storage, because it sounds incredibly clever. Is it essentially a massive geographic rechargeable battery?
That is exactly what it is. So if I'm visualizing this right, when the sun is shining brightly at noon, and our massive solar parks in Rajasthan are producing way more electricity than the grid actually needs at that moment, you use that surplus, cheap power to physically pump millions of gallons of water uphill from a lower reservoir into a high-altitude reservoir.
Yeah.
Then, in the evening, when the sun sets, the solar panels shut off, and the wind stops blowing, you simply open the gates and let that water flow back downhill through turbines, generating hydroelectricity exactly when peak demand hits. Am I getting that right?
You have described the mechanics flawlessly. You aren't storing the electricity itself in chemical batteries, which are expensive and degrade. You are storing the potential energy of the water.
That is so elegant.
It is an elegant, highly scalable solution to the intermittency problem of renewables. India currently has about 4.7 gigawatts of pumped hydro installed, but there is a massive 63 gigawatts under various stages of development and surveying. Moving forward, integrating these pumped storage projects will be the critical factor for surviving future El Niño years without reverting to coal.
Speaking of surviving extreme weather and navigating extreme geography, let's look at the next major geographical flashpoint in our notes, the proposed development at Indira Point.
We are shifting from managing the energy grid to navigating the incredibly tense intersection of environmental conservation and strategic geography.
Right. Let's start with where it is.
For context, Indira Point is located on Great Nicobar Island. It is India's absolute southernmost tip. It sits at 6 degrees 4 minutes north latitude. It is closer to Southeast Asia than it is to the Indian mainland.
And according to the sources, there is a major proposal currently sitting with the Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate Change. They want to build a large convention center, a museum, and extensive tourist facilities right there at the tip.
Yes.
Which seems to create a massive tension between the area's extreme strategic value and its extreme ecological sensitivity.
Let's outline the strategic geopolitical side first. Geographically, Indira Point is one of the most strategically valuable pieces of real estate on the planet for the Indian Navy.
Because of the location.
Exactly. It is only 90 nautical miles from Sumatra in Indonesia. As we discussed earlier regarding the Malacca Strait, Indira Point sits right on the edge of those western approaches. It is a natural, unsinkable aircraft carrier and surveillance outpost overlooking the critical junction of the Bay of Bengal, the Indian Ocean, and the gateway to the South China Sea.
So we want a presence there.
From a defense establishment perspective, building civilian and dual-use infrastructure there is a way of physically asserting India's presence, extending our logistical reach, and supporting future military use cases in a highly contested maritime domain.
But the ecological cost of pouring concrete there, I mean, looking at the environmental zoning, this area falls under CRZ-IA. That is the absolute highest level of coastal regulation zone protection for ecologically sensitive areas. You're not really supposed to build anything there at all.
Yes. And beyond the CRZ rules, the entire area is part of the Galathea-Nicobar Biosphere Reserve. This isn't just a regular beach. We are talking about pristine, untouched coral reef ecosystems, extensive seagrass beds, and crucially, the primary nesting beaches for the giant leatherback sea turtles, which are a highly endangered species.
Wow, so it's a critical habitat.
It is. Plus, it is in close proximity to the homeland of the Shampan people, a particularly vulnerable tribal group who have lived in isolation for millennia.
And we cannot forget how physically vulnerable this specific piece of land is to natural disasters. I want to remind you, the listener, of the geography here. During the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, this area was absolutely devastated.
Right.
The tectonic shift literally permanently submerged parts of Indira Point. It destroyed the original lighthouse and tragically killed the lighthouse keeper and his family. The geography there isn't just ecologically sensitive, it's actively shifting under immense tectonic forces. Building a massive convention center there seems like tempting fate.
That is the core of the environmental pushback. Exactly. And this convention center proposal isn't happening in isolation. It is proposed as part of the broader, massive 72,000 crore rupee Great Nicobar Holistic Development Project, which already controversially includes a mega international container transshipment terminal, a new greenfield airport, and a township.
That is a massive footprint.
Navigating the environmental clearances for building high-footfall tourist infrastructure on a subsiding coastline inside a biosphere reserve is going to be incredibly contentious. It is the ultimate test of balancing national security imperatives against ecological preservation.
It is a fascinating and difficult debate. But while the government is trying to build strategic outposts at the absolute bottom of our geography, Indian private enterprise is pushing toward the absolute top, breaking the atmosphere entirely. Let's launch into the developments surrounding Skyroot Aerospace's Vikram-1 rocket.
This is a brilliant story intersecting the privatization of space and modern economics. Skyroot Aerospace, which is a highly successful private startup based in Hyderabad, is currently prepping for the next commercial orbital launch of their Vikram-1 rocket.
Okay.
And what is making headlines is the payload. It is highly unusual.
The notes say they are carrying the usual nanosatellites, some scientific experiments, and wait, diamond jewelry?
Yes, actual diamond jewelry. A Surat-based luxury brand has booked space on the rocket to send diamonds into orbit.
Okay, my first instinct when reading this was to wonder about the science. Are they trying to manufacture synthetic diamonds in a zero-gravity environment to see if it changes the crystalline structure? Because that would be incredible material science.
No, nothing that scientific at all. The diamonds are fully manufactured and cut right here on Earth. This is purely a high-end luxury marketing stunt.
Seriously, just for PR.
Yep. They are physically flying the diamonds to low Earth orbit, exposing them to space and bringing them back down so they can sell them to ultra high net worth individuals with authentic space-flown branding.
That is absurd.
Think of it like a luxury watch brand charging a massive premium because the watch went to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, or selling a jacket because it was worn on the summit of Everest. It's premium experiential positioning.
Wait, if the private space sector is booming so much and launch capacity is supposed to be precious, doesn't allowing companies to just launch luxury diamonds for PR stunts clog up orbital pathways? Why is the regulator prioritizing PR stunts over actual scientific payloads?
That is the beauty of the commercial market. The regulator isn't prioritizing anything other than safety and legality. If the payload is safe and the company pays the launch fee, they fly.
Ah, capitalism in space.
Exactly. It sounds a bit silly to send diamonds, but the underlying business implication is massive. It proves that India's private space sector, known as the new space ecosystem, is wide open for highly commercial, non-traditional business models.
Right, it's not just ISRO anymore.
Exactly. For decades, until 2020, ISRO held a strict monopoly. They did everything from building the rockets to launching the science probes. Then the government initiated reforms and created InSpace, the Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center.
And their job is basically to facilitate private companies.
Their sole job is to authorize, regulate, and facilitate private players. Since that regulatory roadblock was removed, over 300 private space entities have emerged in India.
And looking at the global landscape, they are stepping into a massive vacuum right now, aren't they?
A historic vacuum. Look at the global commercial launch market. Europe's much-delayed new Ariane 6 rocket is facing operational issues. Russian Soyuz rockets, which used to carry a huge portion of commercial satellites, are completely sanctioned out of the Western market because of the conflict in Ukraine.
Right.
And Western aerospace companies generally refuse to launch their proprietary tech on Chinese rockets due to IP theft concerns and geopolitical rivalry.
Which leaves a massive gap for reliable, neutral launch providers. I know SpaceX's Falcon 9 absolutely dominates the market, launching for about $2,700 per kilogram to low Earth orbit, but they focus on massive, heavy payloads and ride shares. Where does a company like Skyroot fit in?
Skyroot is smartly positioning the Vikram 1 to fill the dedicated small to medium payload gap. They are targeting a launch cost of around $3,000 to $4,000 per kilogram.
Which is very competitive.
Very. By using incredibly innovative cost-saving technology like entirely 3D printed cryogenic engines and carbon composite structures, these Indian startups aren't just doing science experiments. They are ready to capture a huge slice of a global commercial launch market that is valued at over $6 billion annually. Taking diamonds to space just proves they are open for lucrative business.
From the boundless, unregulated freedom of commercial space enterprise, we have to return firmly to the ground to examine the strict, sometimes rigid boundaries of the legal profession. Let's look at the controversy surrounding bar associations refusing to take up cases.
This is a complex constitutional issue that intersects fundamental rights with legal ethics. And again, an impartial reporting disclaimer is absolutely necessary here.
Definitely.
The specific cases that trigger these controversies usually involve intense moral outrage. There are heinous crimes, brutal rapes, terrorism, or mass mob violence. We are solely analyzing the constitutional and statutory frameworks surrounding a citizen's right to legal representation. We are not making any moral judgments on the alleged crimes themselves.
Understood completely. The core issue highlighted in our sources is that multiple local and district bar associations across the country have a habit of passing collective resolutions. These resolutions explicitly state that none of their member advocates will defend the accused individuals in specific, highly publicized, heinous cases.
And this creates a direct, aggressive clash between the constitutional duty of the legal system and the collective boycott by the lawyers. Let's look at the foundational law. Article 22(1) of the Indian Constitution unequivocally guarantees that no arrested person shall be denied the right to consult and to be defended by a legal practitioner of his choice.
It is a fundamental right. It doesn't say unless the crime is really bad.
Exactly. It's absolute.
So the Constitution guarantees the accused a lawyer. But how does that apply to the lawyers themselves? If I'm an independent professional, can the state force me to take a client I don't want?
That professional obligation is governed by the Advocates Act of 1961 and the specific rules framed by the Bar Council of India, the BCI. Chapter 2 of the BCI rules explicitly outlines the standards of professional conduct. It states that an advocate is bound to accept any brief in the courts where they propose to practice at a fee consistent with their standing.
You have to take the case.
The rule exists specifically so that you cannot refuse a case simply because the accused is unpopular or because the crime alleged is heinous or because you fear public backlash.
I understand the constitutional right of the accused to have a fair trial, but I have to push back on behalf of the individual lawyer here. Let's take a real-world example referenced in the notes. The tragic March 2020 Palghar mob lynching case in Maharashtra, where sadhus were brutally killed. The local bar association initially refused to defend the accused.
Right.
If I'm a lawyer practicing in that town and I find a crime so morally abhorrent, or if defending the accused violates my deep personal conscience and religious beliefs, can the state legally force me to stand up in court and vigorously defend them?
It is a crucial distinction, and the law does account for human nature. The law recognizes individual conscience. The BCI rules do allow an individual advocate to refuse a case for special circumstances or profound personal reasons.
Oh, okay. So there is an out.
If you are individually traumatized by the nature of a case, if you have a conflict of interest, or if you feel you cannot provide a competent defense due to moral compromise, You, as an individual, can step away. What is strictly illegal and unconstitutional is the collective association enforcing a blanket ban.
I see the nuance now. An individual can recuse themselves, but the union cannot mandate a boycott.
Exactly. The Supreme Court of India has ruled multiple times, very forcefully, that a bar association passing a resolution to collectively boycott a case or to strike and paralyze a court is fundamentally illegal and constitutes contempt of court.
Because it blocks access to justice.
Yes. You cannot use the power of a professional union to deliberately deprive a citizen of their Article 21 right to access justice and a fair trial. If one lawyer refuses for personal reasons, the system survives. If all lawyers are bullied into refusing because of a union resolution, it completely vitiates the Constitution.
That makes total sense. And what happens if literally no one wants to take it?
In those rare cases where community pressure is so high that no private lawyer will step up, the state legal services authorities are statutorily mandated to step in and provide competent defense counsel. The system demands a defense.
That is a very clear and important distinction for understanding the limits of collective action. Individual discretion is protected. Collective denial of fundamental rights is not. Now, lawyers aren't the only professionals whose private actions serve a fundamental public interest. That logic leads perfectly into the next legal debate, the Delhi High Court ruling on media as a public function.
We are staying within the realm of constitutional rights, but shifting focus to the boundaries of press freedom. The Delhi High Court recently issued a fascinating ruling stating that media organizations, when they're broadcasting news and informing the public, are actively performing a public function.
Okay, a public function.
And because they perform a public function, they are subject to public accountability requirements, and their actions can be scrutinized under writ jurisdiction.
And the media organizations involved obviously tried to argue against this, right? I mean, as in they invoke journalistic privilege, arguing that they need total immunity from this kind of scrutiny to protect their anonymous sources and maintain editorial independence from the state.
Yes, that was the core defense. This stemmed from a defamation suit against a prominent TV channel. The channel's legal team essentially argued, you cannot force us to disclose our internal editorial processes or reveal certain information because we are absolutely protected by Article 19A of the Constitution,
which guarantees the freedom of speech and expression. Let's remind the listener of a unique quirk in the Indian Constitution here, because it differs from other democracies. There is no explicit, separate freedom of the press written anywhere in our Constitution, is there?
Exactly right. Unlike the United States, which has the First Amendment specifically protecting the press as an institution, Indian press freedom is entirely read into and derived from the general citizen's right to free speech under Article 19(1).
So a journalist just has the same rights as a normal citizen?
Legally speaking, yes. A massive media conglomerate has no special elevated constitutional rights that a regular citizen writing a blog doesn't have. They are subject to the same reasonable restrictions under Article 19(2, like defamation, public order, and state security.
But practically, they need some protection.
However, courts have historically recognized via precedent that the press needs certain practical protections, like source confidentiality, to actually function effectively as a watchdog in a democracy.
So how did the High Court balance this? Because if the media performs a public function, doesn't that mean they can be scrutinized, regulated, and held accountable almost exactly like a government department?
The court relied heavily on the public function doctrine. This legal doctrine dictates that when a private entity, whether it's a private TV channel, a private electricity distributor, or a private airline, acts as a public watchdog or provides a critical utility that affects the masses, they cannot claim absolute immunity from accountability just by shouting that they are a private corporation. They have a duty of care to the public.
And this inevitably ties into the citizen's right to privacy right. The fundamental right established in the landmark Swami judgment under Article 21.
Yes, it is the eternal defining clash of modern media law, Article 19(1 press freedom versus Article 21 right to privacy. To understand the precedent, our notes bring up the famous 1994 Otto Schenker case, officially known as R. Urjamapal v. State of Tamil Nadu.
Whatever there.
In that case, a convicted serial killer wanted a magazine to publish his autobiography, which implicated several police officers. The state tried to stop the publication, claiming it violated the officer's privacy.
Ah, I see the conflict.
The Supreme Court had to establish a framework. That case first laid down the complex rules for how courts must balance a citizen's right to privacy against the press's fundamental right to publish information that is in the overriding public interest.
And how did the recent ruling update that?
The recent Delhi High Court ruling essentially modernized and reiterated that exact balance. Journalistic privilege certainly exists, and source protection is vital, but when you broadcast information to millions of people wielding massive societal influence, you cannot use that privilege as a blanket shield to escape accountability for defamation, reckless reporting, or severe privacy violations. With massive public reach comes massive public accountability.
It is entirely about balancing opposing forces in society. Speaking of which, let's use that exact idea of balancing opposing forces to transition to a literal collapse of physical balance in the natural world. Let's look at the Pune-Mumbai missing link landslide.
We are moving from legal frameworks into pure physical geography and disaster management. A massive landslide recently hit the missing link section of the Pune-Mumbai Expressway at Kandalagat. It's severely disrupted traffic on what is arguably India's most vital, high-density economic corridor.
I want to understand the why here. Why is this specific stretch the missing link, which was built as an engineering marvel, to bypass the old GATT section so uniquely vulnerable to failure? Because looking at the geological notes, experts are saying this was a completely predictable event based on the rock type.
It is an event driven entirely by deep time geology intersecting with modern civil engineering and extreme monsoons. The Western Ghats in this specific region of Maharashtra are composed of Deccan Trap basalt.
Right, the volcanic rock.
For context, this is incredibly hard volcanic rock that was formed roughly 65 million years ago by massive lava flows. But crucially, while basalt is hard, this specific Deccan Trap formation is highly jointed and fractured. If you look at it closely, it is full of deep, horizontal and vertical cracks, essentially creating massive stacked blocks of rock rather than a single solid sheet.
And then you add the catalyst, the southwest monsoon.
Exactly. When incredibly heavy, concentrated monsoon rain pours down on these hills, the water doesn't just run off, it seeps deep into these ancient rock joints and fractures.
Oh, sounds bad.
The water acts as a lubricant between the massive blocks of basalt. More importantly, as the water fills these deep cracks, it builds up immense hydrostatic pressure from the inside out, literally pushing the rocks apart.
Just from the pressure of the water?
Yes. Now, add the human engineering factor. To build this wide, multi-lane expressway, engineers had to cut directly into the hillside, often at very steep gradients, like a 1.7 slope. This excavation exposed these vulnerable, waterlogged, jointed rock faces, removing the earth that previously supported them.
So it's basically a ticking time bomb?
When the hydrostatic pressure inside the mountain gets too high, the engineered slope simply fails, and millions of tons of basalt slide catastrophically onto the highway below.
The cascading economic effects of a blockage here are just staggering. The Pune-Mumbai corridor sees over $1 billion in daily economic activity. A landslide here doesn't just inconvenience daily commuters. It instantly disrupts the highly calibrated supply chains for massive pharmaceutical companies in Pune and auto component manufacturers that rely on just-in-time delivery between the two cities and the port in Mumbai.
And beyond the immediate economic pain, we must connect this localized infrastructure failure to the macro picture of the entire Western Ghats ecology. This landslide in Maharashtra is driven by the exact same underlying geographic vulnerabilities, the same combination of steep slopes, heavy rain, and human intervention that caused the utterly devastating July 2024 Wayanad landslides down in Kerala.
A whole mountain range is vulnerable.
The entire Western Ghats spine is currently at risk. This is exactly why the ongoing, highly controversial debate over finalizing the eco-sensitive area, or ESN, notifications across these states is so urgent. You simply cannot engineer your way out of unstable 65-million-year-old geology with just more concrete. You have to legally manage and restrict human intervention and construction around it.
Okay, take a deep breath. We have thoroughly unpacked the major conceptual and analytical topics from today's sources. Now it's time to shift gears. We are going to rapidly synthesize the key factual takeaways, bouncing them back and forth, specifically targeted for your prelims retention.
Let's do it.
Let's do the mapping places and news segment. I'll throw out the location, you give me the hard facts, and I'll lock it in. Let's run through them. First, Indira Point.
Indira Point is located at exactly 6 degrees 4 minutes north latitude. It sits on Great Nicobar Island, making it India's southernmost point. Crucially, it is only 90 nautical miles from Sumatra, Indonesia. It is the site of a highly controversial proposed convention center and was severely affected by the 2004 tsunami.
Got it. 6 degrees 4 minutes north, Great Nicobar, 90 nautical miles from Sumatra. Next up, Prambanan, Indonesia.
Visited recently by PM Modi, it is a stunning 9th century UNESCO World Heritage Site located in Yogyakarta. It is the largest Hindu temple complex in Southeast Asia, dedicated to the trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. India's ASI is partnering to help conserve it.
9th century Yogyakarta, Hindu Trinity, ASI Conservation. Moving to the coast. Visakhapatnam, Andhra Pradesh.
It serves as the headquarters of the Eastern Naval Command. This is the exact site where the final P-17A stealth frigate, the INS Mahendragiri, will be commissioned on July 11th.
Eastern Naval Command HQ, commissioning site for Mahendragiri. Speaking of which, map the actual Mahendragiri for me.
Mahendragiri is a prominent mountain peak located in the Eastern Ghats. It sits right on the border of Odisha and Andhra Pradesh, specifically in the Gajapati district of Odisha. It gives its name to that final stealth frigate.
Peak in the Eastern Ghats, Odisha AP border. Next, Kandalaghat, Maharashtra.
Geographically located between Lonavala and Khopoli, it is defined by its 65-million-year-old highly jointed Deccan Trap basalt geology. It is highly prone to rainfall-induced landslides and is the site of the recent Missing Link Expressway disruption.
Deccan Trap basalt, between Lonavala and Khopoli, landslide zone. Next up, Dharamsala, specifically McLeod-Ganj in Himachal Pradesh.
Often referred to as Little Lhasa, it has been the official residence of the 14th Dalai Lama since he fled Tibet in 1959, and it serves as the headquarters of the Central Tibetan Administration, or the CTA.
Little Lhasa, home of the Dalai Lama since 1959, CTA headquarters. And finally, a brief note on the Taj Mahal in Agra.
A quick legal development to track here. The Allahabad High Court has sought responses from the Archaeological Survey of India regarding a petition asking to survey allegedly sealed rooms in the Taj Mahal complex for remnants of a Hindu temple. No survey has been ordered yet, but it is a legal development to watch regarding the 1631-built UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Allahabad High Court petition, ASI response pending on sealed rooms.
Yeah.
Excellent. We've mapped the facts, and we've explored the deep mechanisms behind them.
Yeah.
Now let's pull all these disparate threads together. Give us a final thought to chew on as we wrap up.
Well, today we discussed the incredibly messy, hyper-political challenge of mapping our citizens' castes on paper for the 2026 census, dealing with thousands of unstandardized names and century-old baselines. Simultaneously, we talked about Indian private aerospace companies launching luxury diamonds into orbit on 3D-printed commercial rockets. And as India actively pushes to claim a permanent seat at the UN Security Council to help legally govern the globe, you really have to step back and wonder, will our biggest future challenges as a nation come from mastering the infinite cold space above us, or from managing the intricate, microscopic, and deeply emotional human data right here on the ground?
That is a brilliant and provocative question to leave you with. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into today's sources. Keep connecting the dots, keep questioning the material around you, and we will see you next time.